Here is the tale of a woman living her life as she always has, but with the consequences of that attitude. Staying out of politics and not making waves demands a price to be paid, even if you are not the target. Enjoy experiencing a day in the life of a woman who is now paying for blinding herself to life's darker undertones.
The Ostrich. I call her Parsons, and she rides like the wind. I named her that after Clint Eastwood's horse in The Outlaw Josie Wales. Steve McQueen rode the same horse when he starred in the movie Tom Horn. He was a beautiful brown quarter horse that starred in many movies back in the day. I always loved old westerns, and I love horses too. There were quite a few star horses in that era: Trigger, Silver, Buttermilk, and Champion, to name just a few of them. But I liked Parsons most of all. A funny thing about Clint Eastwood making all those cowboy movies is just how allergic to horses he was. My word, can you imagine filming all day on the back of those things, with your eyes watering while you're trying not to sneeze? There are some sad facts about those movie horses, too. I read about how many of them got injured or killed while filming. Way back then, before safety laws were introduced, hundreds of horses ended up hurt and had to be put down. It was terrible, really. Those days are long gone now, though. Anyway, it's a Wednesday, which is the day I ride Parsons into town to collect food and explore the stores for supplies. The weather is hot, and the mud on the cliff path is baked dry. The path runs from my home directly into town. Dusty particles rise up from the cracks forming under each of Parsons' wheels as I ride down the bumpy pathway. The dust trail we make only stops when we reach the first paved street on the edge of town. On this street are the pretty white stone cottages that tourists used to rent out. The view of the coastline from here is simply breathtaking, and on a clear day like today, you can see for miles out to sea. Past the cottages are the brick family homes on streets with wide tarmac roads that lead into the town center. On hot days, I always wear a bandana or kerchief over my mouth and nose. The smells are extra terrible with the heat, and oh my gosh, the bugs are everywhere. When we reach the lane where most of the shops are located, I find my usual spot by a low wall in the shade and park Parsons. After locking my bike to the lamppost next to the wall, I pull on my long gloves and put my rucksack on my back, then walk by the first store. Greaves Garments reads the sign above the town's only haberdashery. I used to go there all the time when I was into cross-stitch and embroidery. They had a huge variety of colors of thread available. I could get patterns from there too. 2 patterns for £1, and any small reel of thread was 80 pence. Oh, how I loved making pretty flowers and animals, decorating bags, clothes, or even just creating pieces to hang above the mantel or put in the hallway. Embroidery can be traced back to 30,000 BC, according to archaeologists. There are fossils clearly showing embroidered boots and clothing all over the world. Needlework was considered a noble refrain for women from the earliest Indian and Chinese empires, all the way through to Europe in the Middle Ages. Now it's just a hobby, of course. The shop next to the haberdashery is Timball & Sons, a second-hand bookstore where you could also order specific books. 2 large yellowing posters cover each of its front windows. The left one is half torn down, but you can still clearly see the strange Celtic cross with its right-angled arm extensions. The words, Northern Alliance, are only visible on the poster that is positioned in the right front window. Now, this used to be a great place to visit. I loved the smell of the books, a slightly mustier version of the fake book smell used in the mega bookstores like W.H. Smith's, but at least it was real. There were 8 rows of bookshelves, each stacked to the ceiling, with some shelves requiring the use of a rolling stepladder to reach. The books were organized alphabetically by author. except for the bargain bin, which was just a chaotic mess of torn and tattered works that most people had no interest in. I'd sometimes find some decent old fantasy novels with their covers intact, which I liked to read while having a bath or while Frank was away fighting. I hated those worry-filled days and nights when he was gone, and I never knew if he'd come home again. I decide not to go into Timball & Sons today. There's more than enough reading material at home. I'm only just halfway through The Fall of Hyperion by Dan Simmons, the second in a series of sci-fi epics spanning 1,000 years of civilization's advancement, which is used as a backdrop to question the meaning of faith, sacrifice, and the human condition. Where would we be without the inspiration of these great epics? I don't need any reading material today, so I'm moving on. Before I come to the third shop, I stop, and with a flat horizontal hand held to my forehead to act as a sun visor, I look across the street towards the car mechanic's garage. It's hard to get a clear view as my sight is blocked by the many bodies still hanging from the beautiful old oak tree in the center of the town square. The mechanic's garage is the most likely place to see any new vehicles that may have entered the town because their occupants often need spare parts for repairs or they need fresh oil. I can't see any new cars there today, though. I turn back and continue down the lane, almost tripping on one of the corpses that still hasn't been cleared away. I recognize the pale blue overcoat that belonged to Mrs. Evelyn, her arms stretched out in front of her with bony fingers clasped together, forever pleading. She was the headmistress at the school back when children still went to schools. What was it Frank had called her? Oh, that's it. He called her a groomer because she was teaching children leftist propaganda or something. Stepping over her remains, the next shop is the town's post office. The old Royal Mail signage was painted over red with "Whites Only" and "No Queers," spray-painted in black lettering. We used to get each other's birthday cards from here, my husband and I. Frank would always get me romantic-looking cards with flowers on the front and a sentimental verse inside. I preferred to buy him humorous cards because he liked a good chuckle. I remember one I got him that said, "You can be anything you want on your birthday," with a picture of a dog dressed like a policeman. On the inside it said, "Except younger." Well, it made me smile anyway. I go into the post office because they used to stock some general goods, and most scavengers overlook it. They also have useful items like pens, tape, washing up liquid, and soap. I did find a puncture repair kit for Parsons the first time I looted the place, but that was a long while ago. After searching around, I take anything useful I can find and place it inside my rucksack before setting off again. I think I hear someone moving around behind the counter, but it's probably just rats. The rats in summer are getting to be quite the problem, along with all the bugs. There is no more pest control, no one to call to complain about the problem, and all the poison for vermin had been used up for the regional Northern Alliance culling festival the previous winter. I prefer just to avoid the rats unless they come into my home. If they do that, I have my methods to control them, though, mostly with traps, although I've whacked a few with a heavy shovel, too. Next to the post office is a wide gap that opens into an alleyway leading to the bins. There are a lot of bodies piled up down there, desiccated to the bone at this point, and one body barely distinguishable from another. Swarms of flies used to hover over the heap, but the bodies have been there so long even the bugs have no use for them anymore. The next shop is Anne's gift shop, a store for the tourists filled with what Frank called useless tat. He was not wrong. I never bother going in because I have no use for smashed pottery, keychains with names on them, or faded postcards that nobody will ever write on and will never be posted anywhere. Continuing a little further, I arrive at what is the most important place to retrieve supplies, the Tesco supermarket. The Tesco company managed to keep some of their stores open and functioning for months after the Civil War started. They had to beef up their security, of course, but they did operate more or less as normal for a while. It was strange to see so many guns being carried by their security guards and having to be frisked, even if you just needed to pop in quickly for some milk. We adapt, of course. In America, I saw on the television they'd started arming their children when they went to school. I remember a news report about a group of toddlers led by an older boy who massacred every single teacher while they were tied up in the school staff room. People said it sparked the Holy War because the older boy was an outspoken atheist, and most of the teachers were Bible Belt Christians. In response, a sheriff and several deputized members of a Southern Baptist church crucified the boy and his gang of toddlers. Those images were even used in adverts by the Northern Alliance when they first gained major support over here. Soon after that, the gun laws were changed, and I saw many people here carrying them. "Safe in our hands" was one of the Alliance's slogans they used on posters of gun-toting right-wing politicians standing guard in front of King Willie, Queen Katie, and their 3 children. I enter the Tesco supermarket by climbing through one of its many broken windows, and after adjusting the kerchief over my mouth, I make my way toward the aisles with the canned goods. After the collapse, there was a huge rush on certain food items, and I remember visiting the store at that time. Pretty much all the perishable goods were gone or rotten, and the thousands of cans down 2 aisles were reduced to just a few hundred. Within weeks, there were barely any cans at all. There were some restocks here and there in the months following, but eventually those stopped arriving. People stopped coming too, of course. All that was left were cans of pet food and the kinds of things people never really liked that much anyway. Butter beans, silled, and Spam, for example. I scan the few cans left on the shelves. Most are dented and some have fallen on the floor. There's some cat food I can use in a stew, and I find a real gem too, a can of Scotch broth that had gotten stuck underneath one of the lowest shelves. I put the cans in my rucksack and head to the only other place worth scavenging, the walk-in freezer. The freezer is huge, and it's powered by the store's backup generator. I've been adding fuel to it whenever I find some. I take it from the vehicles that sometimes come into the town. I've been finding just enough to keep it running in the summer months, and the winter months are so cold now that the generator isn't even needed. I arrive at the freezer door, take out the key for the padlock I keep it locked with, and I unlock it. The door is stiff and creaks as I slowly pull it open. I enjoy the cool rush of air hitting my face and observe the misty swirls when I exhale a breath. Before entering, I pause to light one of the candles I've taken from my pocket. Holding up the candle, I can see various meat hooks dangling on long chains, and on the floor are bags of frozen fruit and vegetables. Not all of the meat hooks are bare. Also, I have a few tubs of ice cream I managed to grab before the electric grid went down. There are various flavors, mint choc chip being my favorite, but I limit myself to 1 tub a month as a treat. Without electricity at home, it's impossible to make more, so I value it more than any of the other foods I can get. Mint chocolate chip ice cream was supposedly invented in 1973 by a British culinary student who entered a competition to provide an ice cream dessert for Princess Anne's wedding, although I've also read that chocolate mint was a popular flavor in turn-of-the-century America. It's interesting how often the origin of something can be attributed to more than one place and time. Great ideas last regardless of who came up with them or why. I suppose that applies to really bad ideas, too. I stoop down to fetch a tub, and a paw brushes my right cheek. It belongs to my emergency meat supply I keep in here. I don't need to cut any meat off today, thankfully. I have the cat food and the broth. I put the tub of ice cream and a bag of mixed vegetables into my rucksack, blow out the candle, and padlock the door behind me before heading out of the store again. It's still a nice day, despite the wind which has picked up a lot, and I can hear various pieces of detritus being blown around the streets above the sounds of broken glass crunching under my feet outside the store. I look across to the garage again and have to steel myself because there's a silver car parked there that I'm certain wasn't there earlier. I quickly dip into the alley by the supermarket and hope I haven't been spotted. There's a hammer I keep in my rucksack for emergencies, which I take out just in case. After a few seconds, my breathing calms, and I peek around the corner to observe any movements in or around the car. I note that the car is a Ford Focus, the same make and model as Frank's car was, although his was a dark blue color, and obviously nowhere near as badly dinged and rusting as this one is. Ford first introduced the Focus model in 1998, and it went through 3 design changes until cars stopped being made anymore. I miss the excitement of a new car to look forward to, the convenience of being able to pack one up and drive somewhere for a long or short break. Frank had packed his with supplies and weapons before driving to the recruitment center. I begged him not to go, but he wouldn't listen. He was so angry when he left, angry at me, angry at himself, and angry at the world. We weren't to blame for what happened to Gary. Some people said that children were just born that way, but Frank had no truck with that. Diseased, he'd called it. He'd insisted it was a choice, and by choosing to do what he did, then he was right to choose to disown him. I didn't want to argue about it, so I let him be, and wrote letters to Gary when Frank was out. Sometimes I'd call Gary just to hear his voice. I even spoke to his boyfriend a couple of times, and he seemed nice. I never cared who he loved or what they did in the privacy of their own bedroom, but he would flaunt it, and for Frank, that was way too much. I forgave him, though, because he was my son. The ground begins to shake lightly, and I can hear the familiar rumble of Alliance armored vehicles coming up from the valley. Looking across the street, I hear frantic voices, and 2 men run out of the garage and get into the car. There's smoke coming out of the exhaust, and its tires squeal as they accelerate down the high street. They don't make it far and have to slam on the brakes as a huge black truck pulls out in front of them, blocking their path. The car's reversing lights come on, and there's more smoke and tire noises, but what looks like an armored personnel carrier comes careening around the corner and prevents the car from reversing away. Men with guns jump out of both the truck and the personnel carrier, and I hear shouting. I don't need to see the red and black banners to know they are Alliance soldiers. It's the same banners Frank put on our house and on his car. I stare at the scene unfolding in front of me. It sounds like orders are being barked at the people in the car. After a few seconds, the driver's side door opens, and a man slowly exits with his hands held above his head. There's more orders being shouted, or threats, and one of the soldiers fires his pistol into the air. Suddenly, the passenger's side door swings open, and another man comes hurtling out, running towards the furniture store on the other side of the street. It's the home furnishings store, where I bought our large pine kitchen table the year before Gary left. A series of gunshots ring out, and the bullets shatter what remains of the glass in the furniture store's windows. For a second, I feel like the man is going to make it to the store, but he stumbles, almost stands up again, then falls to the ground. The other man cries out and runs in the opposite direction, towards where I am hiding. I pull back behind the wall so they don't see me, and I hear more gunfire. I hold my breath, and for moments, there are no sounds other than the sound of the vehicle engines idling. I wait. Eventually, I hear the truck and armored vehicle engines revving, and then all the vehicle sounds fade into the distance, and soon it's quiet again. Leaving the safety of the alleyway, I make my way to the man who is lying on the ground closest to me. His head is twisted to one side, and his body is chest down against the tarmac. He isn't moving and makes no sound. I'm pretty sure he's dead. Small streams of blood run from underneath him toward the gutter at the side of the road. I observe his facial features and the color of his skin. He's a foreigner, not brown-skinned, but somewhat tan. Middle Eastern, maybe? Bending down, I search his pockets for anything useful. I do this using one hand at first, but to get to the pockets on the front of his jacket, I put away my hammer and go about the task with both my hands. Alliance soldiers rarely take the belongings from the people they kill. They are, after all, well-fed and well-supplied. But I've noticed these past few months that they no longer string up the bodies as a warning to other undesirables like they used to. I remember in the first year they went about their grim displays with vigor, and I'd often see them drinking and singing like a hunting party around a fresh kill. The hanging tree had a body swinging from almost every branch within a few months, but there are never any fresh corpses displayed there these days. The soldiers seem to perform their duties perfunctorily, bordering on begrudgingly now. I finish searching the man's pockets, but all I find is a folding knife and a handwritten note. I think about going across the street to search the other man, but it's getting late now. Not wanting to stay out in the middle of the street any longer, I put the knife and note into my pocket and hurriedly return to where I'd parked Parsons. There's usually a patrol at dusk, and I need to get out of the town and be back on the cliff path before I'm spotted. I can come back tomorrow to check the body and see if there's enough petrol in the Ford Focus to make it worth my while siphoning it off. The ride back is uneventful, and I arrive home just as the sun is starting to turn a dark orange, then red, as it melts into the horizon. I put away the food that I'd brought back and make a stew from half a can of the cat food and some of the mixed vegetables. It's dark outside now. The sky is a navy blue, and the wind has picked up again, causing the shutters on my windows to creak and bang a little. After I finish eating, I light my candle for the evening. As I get ready to go to bed, the note I found on the foreign man falls out of my pocket. I pick it up to read once I get settled under the covers on my bed. I squint my eyes in the dim candlelight of the room, and holding up the note, I begin reading. Devesh, I know you felt like you had to leave to find food and supplies, but we will be waiting here, worrying about you until you get back. Anupa has been collecting flowers for you, and she told me she hopes Daddy will be back before they wither. Please hurry. Love you always, Nadia. The candle goes out. I make a mental note that I'll need to fetch more candles on my next trip into town. I put the note on my bedside table, wipe the tears from my eyes, and roll onto my side to sleep. Tomorrow is another day.